Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here in my own background, my front yard, as a matter of fact. And it's wonderful to see such a turnout, and I understand there are participants from so many different countries, which I think is very encouraging, that we show solidarity and join hands in trying to not only address the issue, but trying to find a solution to what's going on recently. I would like to thank the organizers for hosting this very important conference today as we approach the 2 years of genocide committed in Myanmar against the Rohingya. What is important for us is to talk about how rape has been and continues to be used as weapons during wars and genocide, past and present in this region. Okay? The two people that I would really like to recognize are my dear brother Zarni, who is, yes, I agree, foul-mouthed, but very effective foul-mouther. And he seems like he has a little magic hat where he pulls out things all over the world at very opportune times. And how he organizes these conferences worldwide is just beyond me. I cannot do what he's doing. And Kinam, who's more soft-spoken, who I fortuitously ran into in Dhaka airport a few years ago, has been such a great advocate, and he has joined hands with other civil society organizations in Korea, and is just really bringing the issue of the Rohingya into the public eye of Korea, and trying to make the connection with what's happened there as into what's happened here in Korea historically. We were under Japanese occupation for 36 very long years, very long years. So I'm going to start today with speaking about, I want to share something about what Zaina Bangura, the former special representative on sexual violence and conflict, had once said. I quote her. She said, "Sexual violence and conflict needs to be treated as the war crime that it is. It can no longer be treated as an unfortunate collateral damage of war." That is such a strong message, okay? And how often have we treated sexual violence as just an unfortunate collateral of war that happened in the past? Yeah. We must remember that during World War II, all sides of the conflict were accused of mass rapes. However, neither of the two courts set by Allied countries to prosecute suspected war crimes in Nuremberg and in Tokyo recognized the crime of sexual violence. This is definitely a big reason why the crime of comfort women, for lack of a better word, I think, sexual slavery, left a terrible legacy, which has lasted until today in our country and in our neighboring countries. I've seen some colleagues from Taipei who's come, and I'm very happy that you're here. It was only after the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslav in 1993, included rape as a crime against humanity. The court later expanded the definition of slavery as a crime against humanity to include sexual slavery. Then the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, in 1994, also declared rape to be a war crime and a crime against humanity. In 2002, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, included rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, and any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity as crime against humanity when committed in a widespread or systematic manner. The court later issued warrants including several counts of rape as both a war crime and a crime against humanity. In Myanmar, the military, the Tatmadaw, has continued to employ this horrific tactic of sexual violence in Kachin, Shan, Cayenne, and now in Rakhine State for decades with total impunity. Just yesterday, the FFM, the fact-finding mission, just launched a second mini thematic report on sexual violence during conflict. And I have said repeatedly that the modus of operandi of Tatmadaw during conflict in other ethnic areas has been the same as what we've seen recently in Rakhine State. They used rape against women, girls, they used mass killings, and just a few years ago a mass grave was discovered in northern Shan. They not only used forced sexual violence against boys and women, boys and men. And I have spoken, and when I visited prisons in Kachin State, in Bamon, I met with young men who were accused under the terrorist law as harboring or having affiliation with terrorist organizations. And how they break into these people was the Tatmadaw will, of course, will torture you and deprive you of sleep. They make you engage in sexual activity in front of others, in front of the Tatmadaw, the officials. That really breaks people's soul, not only their dignity. And listening to these young men telling me this, it was the most difficult thing for me. And after the 2016 so-called ethnic cleansing, which the Tatmadaw considered as clearance operation, tying of women in the homes or taking women out to the hills, gang raping for days, tying women up, tying men up in houses, locking the doors and burning these houses, okay? Raping multiply in front of their kids, doing all kinds of horrific acts against women and young girls, even pregnant women, throwing or slashing or cutting heads off of infants, throwing infants into the fire. And I have seen kids who were rescued by their mother with multiple serious burns. And when you see a little boy of 3 years old who came up to me one day in Cox's Bazar, and he had no expression in his face, and he wanted to tell me that they did this to my father, meaning they chopped him to pieces in front of a 3-year-old boy. Can you imagine the trauma that leaves this boy? And the longer for me as a child developmentalist, I work with child abuse and trauma and prevention of child abuse, and what the early childhood abuse has, how it manifests later in that person and how it affects the society. We worry about re-victimization, and the longer they stay in these camps in dire conditions, they've been there for 2 years now, well, some more than 2 years. Of course, in the 90s too, some came. Every morning they wake up, they see where they're waking up to. Kinam said good morning, but it's really not a good situation they're waking up to. That is, every day they are being re-victimized and being reminded of why they're there and what that long process was for them for even getting to that place. Okay. The two keywords of this conference are genocide and accountability. And against this backdrop, how does one move forward? First, I would like to speak a little bit about genocide. Then I would like to speak a little bit about accountability. And finally, I will discuss how to move forward in the context of Myanmar. And that's the title of my keynote, How to Move Forward. Okay? Before addressing the issue of genocide, whether it is genocide or not, as some argue, I will briefly explain the result of relenting efforts of Raphael Lemkin, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, better known as the Genocide Convention, that was adopted on 9 December of 1948. Finally, genocide was codified, was classified as a crime under international law. Since the entry into force of the Genocide Convention in 12 January of 1951, it took about 3 years to enter into force because you had to have a certain number of countries that would ratify an international treaty or a convention for it to enter into force. This convention enjoys about 150 ratifications and 41 signatures. Of note, Myanmar became a party to this convention in 14 March of 1956. As aforementioned, how to identify what has happened in Myanmar and that which is continuing into the present day has been debated by many. I firmly believe that one must call a spade a spade. There is ample support for identifying the current situation in Myanmar as genocide, an ongoing genocide. Allow me to support my position by explaining briefly what the convention states. The convention defines genocide under its Article 2 as one of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups such as killing, maiming, killing members of the group. Second, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Article 3 goes on to list the following acts as punishable. There's 5 acts. First, genocide. Conspiracy to commit genocide. Direct and public incitement to commit genocide. Attempt to commit genocide. Complicity in genocide. Does that all ring a bell to you? Does that say something about what's happened in Myanmar and what's happening in Myanmar currently? I don't have to go into details further. The intent has been demonstrated by the statements made by the high-level government officials and the commander-in-chief of the Tatmadaw, Myung Line, General Myung Line. Statements such as, and he said this publicly, and I quote, "The Rohingya are unfinished business," clearly points to the intent. The fact-finding mission in Myanmar, for Myanmar in 2018 in its Human Rights Commission report found 4 of the 5 defined acts: killing, causing serious bodily harm, or mental harm, inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the group in whole or in part, and 4, imposing measures intending to prevent births. Births have been regulated for the Rohingya for many years. No more than 2 children could be registered under the household lists, blacklisting more than 5,000 children. In 2004, the government introduced a new law, which was included in this religious package law, that may place birth spacing to 36 months to areas that are declared special zones. And Rakhine is a special zone, in the eyes of the Tetmadar. The 1982 citizenship law literally made the majority of the Rohingya, who once were considered citizens, as stateless. There is no freedom of movement by Rohingya living in northern Rakhine, IDP camps in central Rakhine, and other areas of the state. Access to education and health care is minimal. More surprising is the continuous denial of humanitarian aid to many parts of the state. The actual number of deaths recorded is not conclusive, but Médecins Sans Frontières MSF survey estimated at least 6,700 Rohingya were killed during the 2017 attacks. Myanmar has not allowed any international investigators into Rakhine since 2017 August clearance operation, including myself. Let us not forget the so-called clearance operation that drove out over 80,000 Rohingya in October 2016 following ARSA attacks of October 9 of that year. I am concerned that the international community is beginning to overlook the situation of over 1 million Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar, which is now truly a human rights crisis. Responsibility for which lies in Myanmar. It is entirely their responsibility to bring about all necessary conditions for all the people they forcibly drove out to return, and they are completely failing to do so. The remaining Rohingya in Myanmar continue to be denied their rights and persecuted by authorities, making returns from Bangladesh impossible at this time. 128,000 Muslims, including Rohingya in Kaman, of whom 53% are children, still live in encampments in central Sittwe, with no freedom of movement. Even those who participated in that famous 2014 pilot citizenship verification process in Myanmar still do not have freedom of movement. The only free quarter, it's a misnomer, I think, Ong Menglar in Sittwe, it's not free, where about 5,000 Rohingya live, also exhibit dire conditions. They have no freedom of movement to move outside of their so-called free quarter. In Chokpyu, the booming area where a special economic zone will be constructed, thousands of Kaman Muslims, who are one of the 135 recognized ethnic minorities under the 1982 citizenship law, still remain in camps since 2012. Now, are these conditions conducive for return? Conversations I have had with many refugees reveal the following. They wish to return to Myanmar, but only when they know that they will be safe. They will have citizenship and equal rights with the rest of the population in Myanmar, and they will have their property returned to them. Houses and land that were left by the Rohingya when fleeing to Bangladesh have mostly been burned and bulldozed. Satellite images had shown constructions of roads, military bases, and other government buildings on these land that belonged to the Rohingya. Recent satellite images show no construction, or rather construction of the raised property for the Rohingya to return to, only separate housing away from their original places has been built for the returnees, creating a more long-term apartheid-like segregation. We have to remember that in 2014, a new law was passed, the disaster management law, whereby all land or property that is burned returns back to the Tatmadaw. In November 2017, the two governments of Myanmar and Bangladesh concluded a joint agreement for repatriation that would be safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable. 1 year after the agreement, there was a sudden move for repatriation, creating great panic, and no one volunteered. Some even went into hiding after finding out that their names were on the list to be repatriated. Again, this past August 15, two governments, Myanmar and Bangladesh, announced that 3,450 persons were on a list approved for return between Myanmar and Bangladesh, and the date they said was 22nd of August. UNHCR Myanmar has been banned from visiting Rakhine State by Myanmar government. So they could not verify the actual conditions the Rohingya would be returning to, and they expressed concerns. No one volunteered to return this time too. Yesterday I was given information about buses waiting for in the transit area, and no one volunteered to return. Unless conditions were safe and citizenship status were restored, and that everyone individually were consulted and made true voluntary decision to return. Now, nowadays, it's the second wave of this push for a repatriation, and now the refugees in the camps are now facing another dilemma, another problem is that now they will have to deal with, okay, when will the next push for repatriation be? Okay. Now let me address accountability. In my report to the 37th session of the Human Rights Council, I recommended the establishment of an accountability mechanism to maintain and prepare evidence in a master database to support, facilitate impartial, fair, and independent international criminal proceedings in national or international courts or tribunals in accordance with international criminal law standards. Justification for an international accountability mechanism was that Myanmar demonstrated failure to hold those responsible for violations to account. I have repeatedly reported to the Human Rights Council that the pattern of gross violation of the human rights of the Rohingya suggests a widespread or systematic attacks against this community, possibly amounting to crimes against humanity and warranting the attention of the International Criminal Court. However, I have consistently been raising concerns over possible commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Kachin and Shan states, where a protracted conflict has been taking place since 1961. Accountability must be established for the widely reported serious violations of international human rights and humanitarian law, including extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, destruction of property, torture and inhuman treatment, rape and other forms of sexual violence, forced labor, recruitment of children into armed forces, and indiscriminate or disproportionate attacks in Kachin and Shan. It is clear to me that accountability cannot be achieved in the domestic arena. The military announced in March that it had established an investigative court to respond to allegations made by the UN and non-government organizations. Its function and how it worked in parallel to the Independent Commission of Inquiry are not clear. The Independent Commission of Inquiry was set by Myanmar headed by Rosario Manola from Philippines, former ambassador, and there's a Japanese former ambassador in the commission and others. I remain highly concerned about the Commission, which announced in May that its staff had finally undertaken training on international standards for evidence collection and international criminal justice, nearly a year after it was established, and shortly before it was due to report its report to the President of Myanmar. Moreover, the mandate of this commission has now been extended to 2020. This further demonstrates it does not have the capacity to bring justice to victims or be in a credible form of accountability. Of note, there has been a multitude of commissions and military commission established since the 2016 clearance operation. The recent, the very popular case of the two Reuters journalists who was pushing to expose what happened in Indon, the massacre of Indon. They were sentenced for 515 days. They were put in jail. They were finally pardoned by the president, but their charges were not dropped. They still are, their charges are very serious charges under the Myanmar law. Whereas they found 7 soldiers who took part in this Indian massacre. They, of course, jailed them, but they were quietly released after 7 months. And the international community only found out months after that they were released. And I bet the charges were dropped. We don't know. I and the fact-finding mission have found 2 of Myanmar's most opaque enterprises, Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited, the MEHL, and Myanmar Economic Corporation, MEC, both of which are owned and influenced by senior military leaders. Among them are Commander-in-Chief, Senior General Myong Maing, and Deputy Commander-in-Chief, Vice Senior General Sui Win. Furthermore, the FFM recently exposed the MEHL and MEC owning at least 120 businesses involved in everything from construction to pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, insurance, tourism, and banking. Both companies, along with at least 26 of their subsidiaries, hold licenses for jade and ruby mining in Kachin and Shan states. International human rights and humanitarian law violations, including forced labor and sexual violence, have been perpetrated by the Tatmadaw in northern Myanmar in connection with these business activities. Their report, the FFM's report, detailed how 45 companies and organizations in Myanmar donated over $10 million to the military in the weeks following the beginning of the 2017 clearance operations in Rakhine. So-called crony companies with close links to the Tatmadaw later financed development projects in Rakhine State that furthered the military's objective of re-engineering the region in a way that erases evidence of Rohingya belonging to Myanmar. Their report named 2 companies, KBZ Group and Max Myanmar, which helped finance the construction of a barrier fence along the Myanmar-Bangladesh border. Knowing that it would contribute to the suffering and anguish associated with preventing the displaced Rohingya population from returning to their homes and land. They also found that at least 15 foreign firms have joint ventures with the Tatmadaw, while 44 others have some form of commercial ties with Tatmadaw businesses. These foreign companies risk contributing to or being linked to violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. I was encouraged to hear that one country, Belgium, has decided to cut ties, business engagements. At a minimum, they're contributing to support the military's financial capacity. I have previously raised concern that Myanmar security forces contribute 3 personnel to UN peacekeeping. given the most serious allegations of commission of international crimes made against the Tatmadaw, I believe that, in principle, Myanmar's contribution in the peacekeeping force is highly inappropriate and must end immediately. This recommendation did not catch people's attention. That report was last year to the GA, but it did not catch people's attention. Now, how do we move forward? I have, throughout my mandate, advocated for an end to impunity, redress for past abuse, establishment of the rule of law, and democratic reforms. First and foremost, Myanmar must be referred to the ICC without delay. Establishment of an international tribunal was also suggested by me. In addition, application of universal jurisdiction is another means of moving forward, where different countries can apply universal jurisdiction when members of the Tatmadaw or the persons who are known to have committed or contributed or complicit to genocide when they're traveling. Of course, the ICJ is another avenue, and the OIC has now brought this case, initiated a case. The Gambia has initiated a case, the ICJ. But that seemed to have stalled. It's been about 2 months, and we don't hear much from ICJ. Moreover, I have been urging that together with civil society, the international community consider justice in a broad sense to deal with Myanmar's past, in accordance with the pillars of justice, truth, reparations, and guarantees of non-recurrence. Accountability necessarily involves criminal justice. However, non-punitive measures are also important. These include the government recognizing and taking responsibility of what has happened in the past. Saying, yes, we had done these terrible things, and we are going to fix it. That is a first step for any government to move forward on accountability. Without taking these steps, denial and avoidance will only continue and serve to encourage ongoing systematic violations. Specifically, I recommend that the international community keep victims at the center of all approaches to justice and accountability and take gender into account. In addition to reparations, urgent interim relief should be provided to victims who interact with the newly established IIMM and other accountability processes in the future, such that they are ensured protection and access to livelihoods, education, health, psychosocial, and trauma care and legal assistance. Victims should also be provided with assistance and support in accessing accountability mechanisms, and their right to remedy must be upheld, including through reparations, compensation, restitution of property, and guarantee of non-repetition. Restoration of citizenship to members of the Rohingya community with an assurance that they can enjoy the same rights as the other Myanmar citizens is recommended. And seizing arbitrary and discriminatory denial or restriction of citizenship rights and documentation to members of minority religions or ethnicities are also recommended. Amending or repealing the 1982 citizenship law should also be conducted. Furthermore, revising or repealing all arbitrary and discriminatory regulations, laws, and policies that have been previously identified by me should be conducted. The Kofi Annan Commission came up with a recommendation, and I think, I'm afraid this is a misnomer, a pathway to citizenship. That's a misnomer. I strongly disagreed with that. It was the one sticky thorn, and the Kofi Annan had to compromise with the government of Myanmar, especially Aung San Suu Kyi. And so they kind of watered it down to say pathway. What if the pathway leads to a detour or a short end? But we have to remember that Before 1982 citizenship law, many of the Rohingyas were citizens of Myanmar. So I keep saying, restore their citizenship. And even within the 1982 citizenship law, if it was applied by the letter and the spirit of the law, many of the Rohingyas will still have their citizenship. They would not be considered stateless. For a sustainable peace and peaceful coexistence, all acts and publication of advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitute incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, including on social media, must cease, in addition to enacting a law to prohibit such acts in accordance with the Rabat Plan of Action. I am not advocating for a law on hate speech, no. But I am advocating for a comprehensive and anti-discrimination law and policy and active education and awareness campaign about discrimination. Okay. Finally, and I include this in all my reports, although you have heard the Rosenthal report, you have heard of the Rosenthal report, a comprehensive, transparent, independent review of actions by the United Nations systems must be conducted, ensuring that any final report and recommendations are made public. You will see these exact words in 3 of my reports to the UN, consecutive reports. It must include actions taken in the lead up to and after the reported attacks of 9 October 2016 and 25 August of 2017 in Rakhine State regarding the implementation of the UN's humanitarian and protection mandates and within the framework of Human Rights Upfront initiative, and an assessment of whether the United Nations and the international community could have prevented or managed the situation differently and make recommendations for accountability if appropriate. We have heard so much rhetoric as never again by the UN and the international community. How many never agains are you willing to listen to, hear more? Okay. I regret that the Security Council has proven to be ineffective in maintaining peace and security. Therefore, there should be thorough discussions on how to make the Security Council more effective. There should be complete overhaul or reform of the Security Council. If it is going to uphold the UN Charter, notably Article 1, Paragraph 1, which states, the purpose of the United Nations are, Article 1, to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace and the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about peaceful means, and bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement. In sum, all of the aforementioned steps must be accomplished in order to move forward. When you probably heard when you saw my title, How to Move Forward. Oh my gosh, is she going to say, let's forget, let bygones be bygones? No. Without achieving these, there really is no way Myanmar and its people can move forward. Welcome, Kotwetswe. Welcome. Good to see you again. That is an enormous guy who led the White Rose campaign. If you've seen me address the June Human Rights Council, I was wearing the White Rose campaign. It was initiated by that young man. Yes. It's okay. I thank you for your attention and wish you a very fruitful conference. And I will be more than glad to receive your questions. Thank you. Sure.